The title of this presidential address is Early Days. There's a story, a famous story now, of the then Chinese Prime Minister, Zhou Enlai, who met President Nixon at the time that détente between the United States and China was increasing. They met in the Forbidden City in Beijing, and they walked around, and Nixon didn't really know what to say to Zhou, who was a very silent man. So he asked Zhou Enlai what he thought the impact of the French Revolution had been on Western civilization. So Zhou Enlai kind of looked into the lily pond, and there was a long pause, and Nixon wondered if he'd asked the right question. And then Zhou Enlai turned to Nixon and he said, "The impact of the French Revolution on Western civilization, it's too early to tell." Now, the French Revolution was in 1789, 183 years before that conversation. Some people think that what Zhou Enlai was thinking about was the 1968 riots in Paris. They were 4 years before the 1972 conversation. I prefer to think that Zhou Enlai thought the French Revolution was too early to say. It was early days as far as he was concerned. And the outcome of what had happened then in Paris was impossible to tell nearly 200 years later. Some people have said about the church that after only 2,000 years, we are still the early church, that there may be thousands and thousands of years of Christianity to come. And in those years, they'll look back on us and they'll say, this is what they used to do in the early church. And certainly when it comes to this pandemic, we are in early days. It's possible to think as we emerge from the lockdown that we are just about to return to normal. But if you've heard anything of what the world's scientists have been saying, you will know that even with a vaccine, things will not get back to normal for many, many months. And that if the vaccine does for us what the flu vaccine does for the flu, then normality will have to include COVID-19 for the rest of our lives. Different news is emerging as more and more people catch the virus and recover from it, about the long-term effects on individuals and the recession that will hit the world, as great a recession as any we'll know in many lifetimes, that will come and will change things for us once again. These are early days for people who, like us, are exhausted. We're tired out, and I'm not just talking now about the leaders of the church, although that is true of your clergy and church wardens and of your lay leaders. And I know and I'm sure that you will be supporting them and making sure that they get enough rest in these days as they have to think on their feet in this completely changed world. It produces complication and confusion. These tired people have to make difficult decisions. And of course, that's true of our government leaders as well. And I never blame leaders in government for not knowing what they're doing, because none of us knows what they're doing. I sometimes wonder, as I look at some of the world's leaders, why they pretend that they do know what they're doing. But that's a different story. The fact is, none of us knows what we're doing because these are early days. And we need to pace ourselves because we don't know how long the race will be. I want to talk about the reasons why, because we believe in the God we believe in, that in the diocese, the advice that we've given to the churches has been twofold. When it comes to how you worship, when it comes to whether to say communion from home in the days of the lockdown, when it comes to opening the churches for public worship now, the watchwords of the diocese are as follows. Number one, local decisions for local situations. And number two, safety and assurance first. Local decisions for local situations, safety and assurance first. And the theology that underlies that, the thinking about God that underlies that, is very much treasured in Liverpool because of our close relationships with the Roman Catholic Church, because it is the so-called Catholic social teaching. It's the tenets of that, of Catholic social teaching, that are the compass by which we are steering our response in these early days. And I want with you just to look for just a few minutes. We will be finished around 8 o'clock. For just a few minutes at three aspects of Catholic social teaching. You may well know these already, but if not, they will seem to you, I believe, to be common sense. Number one is called subsidiarity. Number two, solidarity. And number three, human dignity. Subsidiarity, solidarity, human dignity. Subsidiarity simply means that you locate the responsibilities of social life in the smallest unit where they properly work. It is the smallest unit that really works, where people can be most human. Even here in the diocese, as we look at these screens and screens of faces, we may find it impossible to get to know people. But in the parishes and fresh expressions and chaplaincies and schools, they are the units where we hope and pray that things can work. But of course, as Mike said when he unfolded the financial picture, they need help. Subsidiarity says that we treasure the local and that we offer help to the local. But, and I'm reading now from a Catholic social teaching book, intervention must be temporary and for the purpose of empowering the smaller body to do its function on its own. Local decisions for local situations. The word subsidiarity is not a million miles away from the word subsidy. Both those words come from the Latin for people who sit behind. Someone sits in a chair, someone else is sitting behind them. When I worked for the National Church as an advisor, I always used to say that I was at the bottom of the Church of England, that the parishes and schools and fresh expressions and chaplaincies were at the top, and that the dioceses and the National Church were there to undergird and support. We were sitting behind. And Mike is in negotiation with the National Church around subsidy, around getting help, temporary help, help for when we need it, so that the local situation can once again stand on its own feet. This synod is based on an agreed understanding of subsidiarity. The things we do are to serve the local church because you are elected by the local church. It's for that reason that I bless the variety in our church. Local churches are different, not only because some are in cities and others in villages, not only because some are rich and others are in deprived areas, but because of the variety of our worship, the different traditions of our Anglican church. I really treasure that because, in my own phrase, serious Christianity is not a style. You can be a serious Christian as a charismatic evangelical, as a conservative evangelical, as a liberal Christian, as a liberal Catholic, as a traditional Catholic, and all points between. If you're serious about God, then the local is where it happens and where you can be serious. And I just want, in passing, to pay tribute to our dear friend Richard Pierce, Father Richard, who has now left our diocese, and this week who moves house to Oxford to begin his new work at the cathedral there. Because Father Richard always used to talk about serious Christianity, and he would go to New Wine meetings, and he would go to Walsingham, and he would go to Pentecostal prayer meetings. He'd go wherever people were serious about God. And I used to love that in Richard. And I hope that we all take the breadth of our church so seriously. The diocese has been generous. What that means is that the local churches and local Christians have been generous financially and in terms of their time in this pandemic, in these early days. But as Mike says, in the end, we'll all need to work out how we can stand on our feet again in this new world. Temporary support is what we need, and hopefully temporary support is what we'll get. But the diocese is not a client of the national church, and the parishes are not clients of the diocese. Instead, we're called to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That's why the rule of life includes our being sent to give. And your generosity is hugely valued and is the way it should be as we go forward. Secondly, and more briefly, solidarity. Solidarity simply means that you commit yourself to the common good, that you don't just do the things that are right for the local. Everything should happen at local level, but the localities should then say, we're going to be there for one another. We're supporting each other. We're in solidarity. It's because of solidarity that we believe in our diocese that we're called to grow the bigger church so as to make the bigger difference. It's because of solidarity that we identified with those who speak out, for example, in the Black Lives Matter movement. For our own Black, Asian, minority, ethnic clergy and laity, we speak out for those on the edge because we're committed to solidarity. Justice is a seamless robe. And if you look at someone like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a magnificent saint of the 20th and 21st century church, you will see a life that's lived in solidarity. It's because of solidarity that everything that Ellen just talked about should be real for us. The General Synod committed our church to work to be carbon net zero by 2030. And we do that not just for our own sake, but for the sake of those, for example, the dioceses in the South Pacific, who literally are seeing their dioceses vanish as sea levels rise and the world warms. We're in solidarity with those people and with all the people, those bishops who would have come and brought their dioceses with them to the Lambeth Conference. We're in solidarity with them, and that's why we stand together. Local decisions for local situations, but also safety and assurance first. Look to the poor first. Care for the poor first. And that's why I'm just going to have to do two things at once now, friends. I know you can excuse me. You can see me, I hope now, but I can't see you. And the reason is that I'm just going to look for a link. I'm not going to play this video tonight because you can all play it on your own computers at home. But we've made a video in connection with our friends in the American church. Canon Mal Rogers has produced this video bringing together all the bishops who would have been here in Liverpool at this time. And I've done a brief introduction, and then each of those bishops has said a line of the Lord's Prayer. And God willing, yes, you'll be able to see the video. In the chat room there, you can see the link. Please don't watch it now because I haven't quite finished. But when I've finished, if you could copy that link and play it, and if not, Stuart will include it in the bulletin this coming Friday. And finally, human dignity. We've wanted to care for people in the pandemic, people over 70, people with previous illnesses, people who are shielding, people who are particularly vulnerable. We've wanted to care for them, which is why we closed the churches early on, and why even now we're saying that all these various guidelines that come from the national church must be followed. It's for the sake of the weak. I still can't understand, friends, why people object to wearing a face mask, because you don't do it for yourself. You do it to stop other people from catching the virus. Human dignity means that we look first of all to the most vulnerable. Bishop David Shepherd, my wonderful predecessor, wrote this book, as you all know, Bias to the Poor. That was the name of his book. The Catholics talk about the preferential option for the poor. If in doubt, do the safe thing for the vulnerable. Local decisions in local situations, safety and assurance first, because every individual is priceless. The elderly and the vulnerable and the shielding, Black lives and disabled lives, LGBTI plus lives, everyone's life matters. And because of that, we will be cautious, even as we're courageous in serving the world. Because these are early days, and we don't know how it will pan out. But I'm committed in the duration of my time with you to hold to these two watchwords in the pandemic: local decisions for local situations, because your parish or school or fresh expression or chaplaincy is the top of the church, and safety and assurance first.